While the NBA and overall sports world was still coming out of the shock that Luka Doncic going to the Lakers has sent everybody into, a 3-team deal had occurred between the Sacramento Kings, Chicago Bulls, and San Antonio Spurs. This trade sent De'Aaron Fox to his preferred destination, and it now pairs him up with one of the league's biggest rising superstars in Victor Wembanyama. Not only does it do this, but it finally puts an end to the Zach LaVine saga, which seems like it's been going on year after year, every single trade deadline, every single offseason. It feels like this guy is getting in trade rumors, and it's finally something has happened with Zach LaVine. The Kings also received 3 first-round picks in this deal, but it's really only 2 because one of them is protected, and I believe it's the Charlotte pick. They won't be seeing that one. It's top 14, I believe, protected. They will not be seeing that pick. After looking in depth to all the trade details, I have to say the Spurs made out like complete robbers in this trade, man. I don't know how they pulled it off, and honestly, the only reason the other front offices aren't getting bashed about this deal is because of how horrible the Luka deal was right before this. All the Spurs did in this trade was give up some of their depth and a future first-round pick to get a star player next to Wemby for the playoffs. I don't know how you could go wrong with that. To me, for the Spurs, this is a home run deal. The Kings are a little bit more confusing for me. I understand that they had to move on from De'Aaron Fox. I'll give them a pass in that regard, because it was reported that he wasn't willing to sign a long-term extension in the offseason and he wanted out. The Kings needed to act swiftly on this or they were going to get hurt and their investment wasn't going to be worth it. I understand that. But the only problem I have with this team now is it's eerily similar to the Chicago Bulls. They have DeMar DeRozan, they have Zach LaVine, 2 former Chicago Bulls, and then they have Domantas Sabonis playing big man, who isn't in the same tier as Nikola Vucevic. He's a higher tier than him for sure, but is still a very similar center to Nikola Vucevic. So if the Bulls are a mid team in the East, what does that make this Kings team in the West? Just an interesting question to think about. Another thing to note about that is Sabonis is also younger than Vucevic, so they have more time in his championship window to build around him and get new pieces around him that maybe aren't Zach LaVine. DeMar DeRozan's on a 3-year deal, so I don't know how they're going to move off him super soon, but at least not Zach LaVine perhaps. This also brings up an incredibly important question. Why did the Kings fire Mike Brown, and how did it affect this? Did De'Aaron Fox want Mike Brown to be out, or did this Mike Brown firing cause De'Aaron Fox to eventually want out? Was that part of the lead up to this trade request, to this I'm not signing in the offseason? Is this part of the Mike Brown firing? I would assume the Mike Brown firing has something to do with this, and I would assume that De'Aaron Fox probably wasn't happy with the way it went, judging off the reports that I can find. Now, looking at Chicago, like I said, I have to give them some credit for getting out the Zach LaVine contract finally. After all these years of talking about doing it, they finally just pulled the trigger and did it. But besides that, I don't really love what they got in this trade. They gained some good role players in this trade, and I do like Trey Jones. And I know some fans are for sure happy that they can control their own pick again, but besides that, this really doesn't move the needle for me on the Bulls, and I think they're still a fringe playoff team, maybe a play-in team at most. Now finally, getting to the big winners of this trade, the San Antonio Spurs. They've been doing a fantastic job building pieces around their 21-year-old franchise superstar, and they continue to do that here, trading for De'Aaron Fox. I honestly can't even wait to see what this duo does next to each other, as Wemby has really never had a scorer like this in his career, I don't believe. You could only really say Stephon Castle, and he just got here this year and he's also a rookie. Which leads me into the next thing. They didn't have to give up Stephon Castle. Now I know Stephon Castle has stated that he would like to be the future one of the San Antonio Spurs and all that, and they're going to have to figure that out, which might involve eventually putting Fox at the 2, which would be some interesting stuff. I want to see what they do before I say too much, but I feel like that could be interesting, and it would be a little bit weird, but they maybe could get away with doing that in the future. And also, you don't have to trade away Castle just because he wants to play the future one. Eventually, you can come off Castle and get more assets off of him later on and build around Fox and Wemby, or eventually, you could just trade Fox away. So I think this is amazing that the Spurs got to keep one of their young assets in Stephon Castle. That's the biggest win for the Spurs in this trade, I think. Besides the small complication that might be Fox and Castle both wanting to run their one in the future, this was a home run trade for San Antonio. Like, maybe giving up Trey Jones, but they're getting a guard back, so even that's not a problem. Nothing in this trade really hurts me for San Antonio. But that's why, again, I look at the Kings, I look at the Bulls in this trade, and I'm looking at their front offices kind of funny. I already knew they had some shaky front offices, but they did not redeem themselves with this trade. This is a bad trade for the Bulls and the Kings. If I had to grade them, I would probably give the Bulls somewhere in the C+, maybe B- range. And then the Kings definitely get like a C- to a D. I don't really love the direction the Kings are going in. I think just because they had that big playoff drought, their hand was kind of forced to at least get a star back, and Zach LaVine was the best they could get. That doesn't put them in a great position in the West, in my opinion. No disrespect to Zach LaVine, but I think it's going to be tough to compete with this roster in the West. It's not looking great. I think they're probably a play-in team, if not getting bounced in the play-in. Yeah, I'm super excited to see this San Antonio team. I really want Coach Popovich to come back. I would love to see what Pop could do with these two stars now, man. Popovich hasn't had a team like this in years, man. I can't even remember the last time. Maybe 2017, 2018. It's been a long time since Coach Pop has had a real deal contending team, and I'm excited to see what he can do with it. Prayers up to him. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time.